All right. Well, I, for one, had a absolutely great time working on the speeches that were part of the assigned coursework for the class, and I felt like I made some really good progress throughout the course of the semester. So I'll just go through and address the questions that are part of the assignment. So, were my introduction and conclusions effective and meaningful, and did I leave the audience with a call to action? For my informative speech, I felt like I did leave the audience with a call to action. I expressed the ways that we could solve and go through the problems with fast fashion, which was the topic of my speech. I felt like it was meaningful. I felt like because the implications and the effects on the environment were made pretty clear, that made the call to action of buying clothes from companies that were against the fast fashion industry. It kind of made that conclusion meaningful, gave the call to action to buy clothes from companies that were not taking part in this system of fast fashion. I felt like less. I felt a little less convinced that my um, persuasive speech offered as a meaningful call to action. Um, I did at some point during the speech say what the purpose of the speech was, or at least how to fix the problems that I was addressing with the infotainment channels, in the sense that I offered the idea of petitioning our government to apply regulations to um, certain channels, and how we could do this, and also gave examples as to how um, these kind of regulations are already a part of other industries. So I did feel like during that speech I gave a call to action. I just felt like it didn't hit quite as hard as my um, speech on fast fashion, on the informative speech. I almost feel like I could I could swap the two and turn the informative speech into the persuasive speech, and the persuasive speech into the informative speech. Um, so there's that. But I think overall I did give a call to action in both. One was just better than the other. So where my speech is structured, organized, and easy to follow, I did feel like I did a pretty good job of organizing the speeches. Again, my informative speech on fast fashion felt like it was organized really well into this like description of fast fashion, the ways that it affects the environment, and then the call to action. Whereas my informative speech, or my persuasive speech, was more kind of felt informative for a few, I guess, like paragraphs or just kind of a few sentences, a minor call to action, and then I guess the conclusion was a little bit more hard hitting in the persuasive speech, but it didn't include a call to action. It was kind of like um, my quote to say this is what Thomas Jefferson, the founding fathers, this is what they believed, and that was kind of meant to be my hard hitting conclusion. But it didn't include a call to action. Did I use transitions? Yes, I absolutely used transitions. Um, I felt like most of my transitions weren't even really written into the speech when I wrote them. They were more off the cuff, um, and they just kind of made my speech, in terms of my actual, not the speech itself, but my speech. It kind of came out of me rather than actually being something that I wrote down, and was trying to be really intentional about. So I do think I use transitions, and I think I use them pretty well. The one that I remember specifically is when I moved to my conclusion on my persuasive speech. Um, I said, let's put a nice bow on it or something like that. So hopefully I'm counting that as a transition for now. Did I make adequate eye contact? Yeah, I felt like I did. Um, I I tried for my first my informative speech. Um, I felt like I was talking directly to the person. Um, and also actually for the persuasive speech, I felt like I was talking, but because for the persuasive speech, I felt like I was drawing on more um, kind of a memory of writing the speech. I felt like I was less practiced and therefore I was making a little less eye contact. Um, whereas the informative speech, I really had that speech kind of down, and I really practiced it, and so I wasn't really as worried about memorizing it. And that kind of moves me into the was I too reliant on note cards? I really don't think I was. I didn't really ever feel like I was reading off of a note card at any point during any of the speeches. I felt like the note cards I was using um, just to remember certain lines and points. And funnily enough, like the main thing that I was putting on these note cards was any sort of numbers or statistics. So in my informative speech, I put down that there were 90 million tons worth of garment waste, that went out into the landfills of the world throughout the course of a year, and that there were 2,500 liters of water that went into a single t shirt. And for my persuasive speech, I wrote down my Thomas Jefferson quote, and just funnily enough, I memorized those things and they had no need for the note card. Um, so yeah, the note cards for me were really just about remembering where I was in the speech. So, I just kind of use it to keep myself organized the way that I had kind of written the speech. Here's where I am now. I moved to, to take an example of the informative speech, so the one I wrote on fast fashion. Um, I kind of used it to say, okay, the first part of the speech is where I describe fast fashion. The second part of the speech is where I describe the effects on the environment. And the third part of the speech is where I say, what can we do as consumers to affect this system and fight against it? And I kind of just use that to walk me through the speech when it came to the note cards. So, what are my vocal characteristics? Articulation, volume, rate, and pacing effective? I thought so. I've never really had an issue with articulation or volume. I think maybe sometimes I could speak a little slower, especially during certain parts of certain speeches. So, like if I have something really well memorized, sometimes I'll talk through that a little quicker than I would have wanted to. And I think I could do better with that. Um, I noticed, not to skip a question here, but we talk about the time requirements. How can I improve? I think there's some parts where I could slow down on. I think there's also some parts that I could be a little more um, descriptive about. I could have done a little bit more research and added more statistics. And, I really think about my persuasive speech, where I feel like I could have been more specific about what I was talking about when it came to, um, what kind of consequences infotainment channels have seen in the recent past, and how, like, there are defamation lawsuits and whatever else there may be that could have been added to the speech. So I think I could have been a bit more detailed, and that was important. So did I stick to time requirements? Um, Technically, yes, but I was always on the low end of that. I felt like, I was never maxing out the time requirements. Did I use a lot of verbal fillers? How can I avoid this? Yes, I felt like I used a lot of verbal fillers. I feel like it's partially just part of my speech to be intentional and thoughtful about things, and sometimes that may include an or a moment of thinking about how I want to say something, and I don't know if I'm really capable of not using a verbal filler. It's hard. It really is hard to sit there and, unless you have a speech memorized completely end to end, no questions asked. Here's the speech, and I memorized every word. Sometimes I just feel like it's impossible to not use a verbal filler. I can't imagine thinking about the thing that you're about to say and not using a or a or some kind of verbal filler. So that was a little tough. And how can I avoid doing this? Frankly, the only answer for me that I can think of is memorize the speech perfectly, never um, improvise at all, which I did do. I did absolutely have moments during all of my speeches where I knew the what I was trying to get across, but I improvised what I had written, and maybe didn't nail it on every single one. But overall, I thought I did pretty well on the speeches. The only thing I could think of, God, now it pains me to say the only thing I can think of would have been to do a little more research, have more numbers and statistics for my persuasive speech, so that I could talk a little more, have a little bit closer to the time limit, be a little bit above, instead of on the really low end minimum. But overall, I felt like my speeches were well put together, well written, and that I presented them well. Okay, thank you. And I had a really awesome time in the course. Thank you.